So the Viking Shield Pendant carving kit is a really enjoyable carving project. It's suitable probably mostly for intermediate and advanced level carvers. For beginners, it could be a bit too much because it requires a lot of depth work and a lot of three-dimensional carving. But don't let that put you off. If you're keen and you want to have a go, just go for it. The amount of detailing that you put into the piece is really up to you, but there's largely very little detailing that's actually required. Most of it is done within the shaping process. As you can see here on my finished piece, the detailing really is around the axe head, the joint between the two axes, and on the shield boss in the centre. I'll go through how to carve all of these as we move on. So, cutting out. With many of my pieces, many of the carving kits, you can pretty much start carving out wherever you like, or cutting out wherever you like. With pieces like this and the steer skull, however, because you've got relatively fragile areas projecting up and down towards the end grain at either end, you really need to start between those areas before you carve down the side. The reason for this is you need to maintain as much wood down the side to help protect these thin pieces as you're carving them. If you were to cut the sides away first and then try and carve in at the top, there's increased chance of you cutting through these finer elements or just simply snapping them off. So you need to keep as much wood as possible on the outside of the handles and the axe heads. Now when you're cutting into end grain, this area here where the wood has been cut through, you'll need to use angled slicing cuts across and down into the wood. The reason for this is that the wood fibres are travelling in this direction, and when you try and put the knife straight down between them, what you'll find is that the wood fibres separate and tend to split. If you're trying to carve directly across them, you'll find that the knife gets caught behind each fibre and tends to skip or jump or get snagged. So doing an angled cut more effectively slices through the fibres, even if you're doing it diagonally into the end grain itself. Once you've carved into these areas, you're then free to take the sides out. Do it slowly, with little curved cuts all the way in, and then when you come to these areas, you'll need to make score lines down the side and then cut those in with thin slices. Now when it comes to shaping on this piece really is the shaping and detailing processes combined. So what you're going to start with is identify the lowest area within the carving, which in this case is the shield itself. What you need to do is to lower that first before you give any attention to the axes that sit over the top. So start by making score line cuts down either side of the axes, all the way around, and then take angled slices up towards the score lines to remove the surface of the wood, and keep on going down until you've reached the depth that you want it to be at. So the depth of the shield and effectively the height of the axes over the top of the shield. Repeat this process in all 4 sections of the shield between the axes. An important thing to remember is you need to make sure that at the top here, the shield is at least 3mm deep, so that you can screw the eyelet in at the end of the project. If you go too thin, you won't be able to get the eyelet in, or you might just snap the piece of wood. So make sure that up here you leave it 3mm deep, or thicker, depending on how confident you feel. Now, once you've achieved sufficient depth, you'll need to redraw the shield outline where it is underneath the axe heads. So there and there. Score all around the area between the axe heads and the shield, and then repeatedly remove slices of wood up to the score lines until a hole is formed between the axe head and the shield. Once you've got a hole, go in with the tip of your knife and just refine that shape, just to make the whole shape as neat as possible. Now to carve the shield boss in the centre, this smaller circle, what you need to do is redraw the circle, because obviously you will have just shaved it off, and then score repeatedly around the outer edge, being careful not to cut into the axe handles as you do so. Once you've scored all the way around, starting from just outside of the score line, shave lightly all the way around to remove thin slices of the wood, and that will just create a little bit of depth between the boss and the surrounding shield. You don't need to go too deep with that. Now onto the axes. You want to try and create the visual illusion of them being separated and lying one over the other. So score lines down either side of the upper axe handle. Shave away thin slices from the lower axe until the whole length of the axe handle and indeed the head are virtually at the same level. Then you want to round off both axe handles. Do it carefully and remember to slice in line with the grain as much as possible. So on this side you'll cut that way, and on this side you'll cut that way. And that should stop the knife from catching. If the knife does start to catch, you're in danger of snapping the axe handles because they're not massively thick. Once you've got the rear axe separated down to a level that you like, you need to now separate the axe heads from the handles to give it some distinction. So score along the lines that separate the axe heads from the handles, and then slice the upper level of the axe handles to drop them down so that you've got some distinction in the depth between the head and the handle. Repeat this on both sides of the heads. As you can see, there's a small amount of handle projecting out of the top of the axe head itself. Once you've done that, you'll want to start shaping the axe heads themselves to give them some movement and shape, to make them look a little bit more realistic. Turn the wood over, because in order to create that realism, you need to pull the axes away from the shield at the back. So turn the wood over, redraw the outline of the shield as it crosses over with the axes, and then create scoreline cuts along those lines, and then shave the wood away until you've created some distance between the shield and the axe. Thin the axes down to a point that you feel comfortable with or that you're happy with, and then if needs be, or if you want to, sand the whole piece down. Remember, start with a tougher grit, so a 120, and then move to the 180 and then onto the 240 to finish. Once you've done that, your piece should be pretty much finished. All you need to do now is screw the eyelet carefully into the top of the shield, making sure that it's right in the centre so it's balanced and doesn't hang awkwardly either way when worn. You then brush over with wood-specific oil such as tung oil or linseed oil, and then remove the excess oil with a lint-free cloth. And that's that. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to check out some of the other carving kits and tutorials that are on my website.